Welcome back to another special episode where we're diving into more strange cases of national park nightmares. Today, we're heading deep into one of the most unsettling topics out there: the strange and often baffling disappearances that have taken place in our national parks and wild spaces. These are cases where people vanish, often without a trace, and the facts surrounding their disappearances leave behind more questions than answers. Sometimes there's no logical explanation. Sometimes the evidence found doesn't make sense. And sometimes, despite exhaustive searches and investigations, no one really knows what happened. These are the stories that defy reason. Over the next few episodes, we'll be looking at several of these strange cases, each one with its own bizarre twists, unsettling details, and heartbreaking mysteries. And today we're starting with the case of Jared Atadero. It's a story that has haunted Colorado for more than 2 decades. It begins as an ordinary day. A father, his 2 children, and a group of friendly hikers on a crisp autumn morning in the Rockies. But by nightfall, 3-year-old Jared would be gone, vanishing without a trace in the wilderness. What followed was one of the most extensive and confusing search efforts in Colorado's history. There were theories of animal attacks, possible abduction, and even wilder speculation. But despite years of searching and the eventual discovery of his remains, the mystery of what really happened to Jared Atadero remains unsolved to this day. So let's take a closer look at the events of that day, the investigation, and the strange details that continue to baffle investigators and experts alike. Jared was just 3 years old in 1999. He was the son of Alan Atadero and Stacy McKissick, and had an older sister named Jocelyn, who was 6 at the time. Alan, a devoted single father and a physical education teacher, was raising both kids on his own. To help navigate life as a single parent, he joined the Christian Singles Network, a local church group that quickly became a big part of their lives. That October, Alan and his kids were staying at the Poudre River Resort, a lodge he co-owned with his twin brother Arlen. One day, members of the Christian Singles Network invited Jocelyn and Jared to join them on a quick trip to the state fish hatchery nearby. At first, Alan hesitated, but when they assured him it would be a short, safe outing, he agreed. What happened next would change his life forever. At some point during the hatchery visit, the group decided to take a hike up the Big South Trail in the Arapahoe and Roosevelt National Forest, about 15 miles west of the resort. It was one of those stunning fall days Colorado is famous for: clear skies, crisp air, and golden leaves. Maybe that's what tempted them to venture farther. But this wasn't part of the original plan, and Alan hadn't known they'd be heading out on a rugged trail. Details of the hike are murky, and the timeline gets a little fuzzy. What we do know is the group split up, some moving faster, others hanging back. Jared, full of energy and curiosity, ended up running ahead. Along the way, he stopped to chat with 2 fishermen, who later told investigators they weren't alarmed. They thought Jared was just part of the group they saw a short distance behind. That was the last confirmed sighting of Jared Atadero. Not long after, the group heard a scream. Some described it as playful, maybe like kids roughhousing or someone pretending to scare him. Others felt it sounded more serious. Either way, it was chilling in hindsight. The group searched for about an hour before returning to the resort to tell Alan his son was missing. Alan was devastated. Witnesses say he collapsed, beating his chest and screaming, "They lost my baby! They lost my baby!" Search and rescue teams were quickly called in. Larimer County Undersheriff Bill Nelson led the efforts. He was confident they'd find Jared. After all, they'd done this countless times before. He figured it was just a matter of locating a scared little boy hiding somewhere nearby. But as night turned to morning with no sign of Jared, his optimism began to fade. The search was massive but chaotic. The media swarmed the area, drawing comparisons to the recent John Benet Ramsey case, another tragic and unsolved mystery involving a Colorado child. Reporters, psychics, and even people claiming to have spiritual powers flocked to the scene. One man showed up with a donkey, claiming he could track Jared down. Another performed a Native American ritual, begging the mountain to return the boy. As if things couldn't get worse, tragedy struck the search team. A military helicopter from F.E. Warren Air Force Base crashed during the mission. The UH-1N Huey had been refueling, then struggled in the thin mountain air. It stalled and plunged 100 feet into the forest. One of the rescuers on board, Mark Sheets, suffered a severe concussion, a shattered leg, broken vertebrae, and a broken shoulder. He later said he'd volunteered for the mission hoping to make a difference, only to nearly lose his own life. Despite everyone's best efforts, no trace of Jared was found. Weeks passed, then months, then years, and the case went cold. It wasn't until May 6, 2003, nearly 4 years later, that two hikers, Rob Osborne and Gareth Watts, stumbled upon something in Poudre Canyon near the Big South Trail. They found a child's fleece sweater, blue pants, and a tiny pair of Tarzan sneakers, the very shoes Jared had been wearing the day he disappeared. Nearby, they found a human molar and a large piece of skull. DNA testing confirmed what Alan had feared for years. It was Jared. But the discovery only deepened the mystery. Many believed a mountain lion had killed him. Yet experts, including Alan himself, questioned that theory. The sweater showed no signs of a typical big cat attack, and the pants were found turned inside out, something a wild animal wouldn't do. Even the sneakers looked remarkably undamaged, with no evidence they had been dragged through the wilderness. Mountain lion tracks had been found near Jared's footprints during the initial search. According to Alan, they seemed to converge right where Jared's tracks suddenly vanished. Still, doubts lingered. Some believe Jared was abducted by a human predator, someone who later dumped his clothing and remains. Authorities investigated people close to the family but found no solid leads. Adding to the strange twists, Alan was later harassed by a man claiming to be Jared. The man was eventually arrested for violating a restraining order. DNA evidence had already confirmed Jared's remains, so the man's claims were quickly dismissed. Today, Jared's case remains officially unsolved. Alan Atadero chose to keep his son's remains, creating a shrine in Jared's old bedroom. He finds peace in his faith and believes he'll see Jared again one day. In his book, Missing: The Jared Atadero Story, Alan talks about his journey through grief and hope, and how his beliefs helped him find meaning in unimaginable loss. Jared's story left an impact on Colorado. In his memory, Governor Bill Ritter declared September 8th Recreational Safety Awareness Week. It's a solemn reminder of the importance of caution and preparedness when we head into the wild. There have been 2 books written about Jared's case, both offering insight into the heartbreak, the unanswered questions, and a father's enduring love. And as of today, the mystery of what really happened to Jared Atadero remains, one of the mountain's deepest secrets. As we close the chapter on Jared Atadero's heartbreaking and perplexing case, it's hard not to be left with a sense of unease. His story reminds us just how quickly things can go wrong in the wild, how a moment's decision can lead to a lifetime of unanswered questions. Despite years of searching, expert theories, and the discovery of his remains, what exactly happened to Jared that day in the mountains remains a mystery. But his story, as tragic as it is far from unique. There are dozens, hundreds of cases where people vanish in the vast expanse of America's national parks. Some are experienced hikers, some are young children. Some, like Jared, disappear almost within sight of others. And what's most chilling is how often these cases leave no trace, no clues, nothing. And that brings us to our next case. It's more recent, it's quieter, but it's just as baffling. In 2019, a 70-year-old man named James H. Pruitt set out for a day hike in Rocky Mountain National Park. He was familiar with the outdoors, prepared for the cold, and expected back by the end of the day. But James never returned, and when searchers went looking for him, they found absolutely nothing. No footprints, no gear, not even a scrap of clothing. It's as if he walked into the Colorado wilderness and simply vanished. Let's take a closer look at the disappearance of James Pruitt, and why this case continues to confound those who search for answers. James H. Pruitt was 70 years old when he embarked on what should have been an ordinary day hike on February 28, 2019. He arrived at the Glacier Gorge Trailhead parking lot, a popular entry point for hikers in Rocky Mountain National Park. Pruitt was an experienced hiker, and nothing about his trip seemed unusual. However, no one knows exactly which route he intended to take that day. He never told anyone his plans. He parked his car, gathered his gear, and set off into the wild. And then, he was gone. Days passed with no sign of Pruitt, no call for help, no word of his whereabouts. When he failed to return, there was no immediate alarm. Perhaps he had decided to extend his trip. But as the days stretched on, his absence became more and more concerning. By March 3rd, park rangers grew suspicious when they noticed his vehicle still sitting in the same spot at Glacier Gorge Trailhead, untouched and covered in fresh snow. That was the moment everything changed. A full-scale search began. But there was one major problem. The weather had already erased any trace of his journey. When search efforts finally kicked off, more than 2 feet of snow had fallen in the area, burying any tracks that could have given investigators a clue as to where Pruitt had gone. His path into the wilderness had been completely wiped away. Teams of rangers, volunteers, and professional search and rescue units combed the area, using helicopters, drones, and avalanche rescue dogs to try and pick up any sign of him. But Rocky Mountain National Park in winter is an unforgiving landscape, treacherous, unpredictable, and vast. It didn't take long for the search teams to realize they were up against impossible odds. The snowfall had created severe avalanche risks, making some areas too dangerous to even explore. Sub-zero temperatures and high winds made visibility difficult. Despite their best efforts, not a single trace of James Pruitt was found. No footprints, no gear, no clothing, nothing. By all appearances, it was as if he had simply vanished into thin air. With no remains or belongings found, all investigators can do is speculate about what may have happened to him. There are a few key theories. One of the most straightforward explanations is that Pruitt simply lost his way. It's easy to become disoriented in a snow-covered wilderness, and if he wandered off the main trail, he may have gotten stuck in deep snow or fallen into an area where he couldn't escape. With temperatures well below freezing and the unpredictable weather of the Rockies, hypothermia could have set in quickly, making it impossible for him to seek help. Rocky Mountain National Park is full of steep cliffs, ravines, and hidden drop-offs, many of which become invisible under heavy snow. One possibility is that Pruitt accidentally walked over a snow-covered crevasse or fell into a deep canyon, becoming completely hidden from view. Avalanches were also a risk during that time, and while no confirmed avalanches were reported in the exact area he disappeared, it's possible that a small slide buried him in the snow, making recovery efforts impossible. Pruitt was 70 years old. Even though he was an experienced hiker, age and health factors always play a role in physical endurance, especially in extreme environments. A sudden heart attack, stroke, or another medical event could have incapacitated him before he had a chance to call for help. If this happened in a remote part of the park, he may have collapsed and quickly become buried under snow and ice before rescuers even had a chance to look for him. While the official theories are the most logical, the case has also sparked speculation. The lack of any physical evidence, no gear, no clothing, no body, leads some to wonder if something more bizarre happened. There are stories, though purely speculative, of other cases in which people seem to vanish without a trace in national parks. Some link these cases to missing 411 phenomena, a term used for unexplained disappearances in the wilderness. However, without any evidence of foul play or anything supernatural, these remain just theories. In the end, what happened to James Pruitt remains a mystery. To this day, not a single clue has been found. No footprints, no campsite, no scraps of clothing, nothing to suggest where he might have gone or what might have happened. His case remains open but unsolved, and officials have presumed him deceased due to the extreme conditions and length of time since his disappearance. For his family and friends, the lack of closure is perhaps the hardest part. Without a body, without a note, without a single sign, there are no real answers. And so, another name is added to the long and eerie list of those who have vanished in America's national parks. Their stories forever left open-ended. James Pruitt's disappearance is a chilling reminder of how quickly nature can swallow a person whole. Even experienced hikers can fall victim to the unpredictable dangers of the wilderness. And yet, his case isn't unique. There are hundreds, if not thousands of similar cases. People who set out for what should have been an ordinary hike, only to vanish without a trace. As we continue our journey into the strange and often unexplained disappearances from America's national parks, we come to a case that's as unsettling as it is mysterious. This is the story of Jong-Yeon Won, a 45-year-old man from Los Angeles, California, who disappeared without a trace inside Grand Canyon National Park. It was September 17, 2017. Park rangers found a white Toyota Camry parked at Moran Point on the south rim of the Grand Canyon. Moran Point is one of those iconic overlooks where visitors often stop to take in sweeping views of the canyon. It's not far from Desert View Drive, a place where tourists frequently pull off to watch the sun rise or set. But this particular car wasn't parked like it belonged to a tourist just passing through. The vehicle had been sitting there long enough to raise concern, and when rangers ran the plates, they discovered it was registered to Jong-Yeon Won, a resident of Los Angeles. That's where things started to get strange. Won was not known to have any specific plans in the area. No one, family, friends, or acquaintances knew he was heading to the Grand Canyon. He hadn't told anyone he was taking a trip. There was no record of him reserving lodging nearby, and no clear reason why he would have chosen Moran Point as a destination. The last confirmed sighting of his vehicle had been earlier that day near the New Hants Trailhead. For those unfamiliar, New Hants Trail is one of the most rugged, remote, and least maintained trails on the South Rim. It's not a trail you stumble across by accident, and it's certainly not recommended for inexperienced hikers. Descending steeply for over 6 miles, the trail drops about 4,500 feet in elevation to the Colorado River. Conditions are harsh. There's little shade, no water sources, and plenty of warnings about the difficulty level. Even seasoned hikers take it seriously. There's no evidence that Jong-Yeon ever planned to hike that trail, or any trail for that matter. But his car being seen there raises the obvious question: why? Why would a man from Los Angeles, who had no known connection to the area, park his car near a remote, dangerous trailhead? And then, why was his car later found at Moran Point? It was almost as if he, or someone else, moved it. From the moment park rangers realized something wasn't right, they launched a search operation. They scoured the area around Moran Point, sent teams down New Hants Trail, and conducted aerial searches. But there was no sign of Jong-Yeon Won. No footprints, no dropped items, no clues. He was simply gone. Unlike other parts of Grand Canyon National Park, where disappearances sometimes have clear explanations: heat stroke, dehydration, accidents, the circumstances here were different. Won wasn't seen hiking. He wasn't seen at a visitor center or interacting with anyone in the park. His presence there was a complete mystery from the start. Even more perplexing was the fact that there was no indication of his intentions. He left no notes, no messages. He made no phone calls or texts to anyone letting them know where he was. There's been no financial activity since he vanished. His family didn't report him missing before the discovery of his car, because they didn't even know he was gone. Some wonder if Jong-Yeon intentionally disappeared. Did he come to the Grand Canyon with the intent to start a new life somewhere off the grid? Or did he plan to end his life at one of the most famous and remote landscapes in the world? The problem with those theories is that there's no supporting evidence. No witnesses saw him approach the canyon's edge. No remains have ever been found at the bottom of the cliffs near Moran Point, or along the steep, treacherous New Hants Trail. And typically, when someone vanishes with the intent to disappear, there are signs, preparations, clues left behind. In this case, there's nothing. It's as if Jong-Yeon Won simply vanished into thin air. Grand Canyon National Park has a long history of strange disappearances. Every year, millions of visitors pass through, many staying safely on marked paths and overlooks. But for those who wander beyond, intentionally or otherwise, the risks are extreme. Temperatures can soar, terrain is brutal, and the sheer drop-offs are unforgiving. Yet even in those harsh conditions, it's rare for someone to disappear so completely that no trace is ever found. As of today, Jong-Yeon Won's whereabouts remain unknown. His case is still open with the National Park Service, and authorities continue to seek any information that could provide answers. But the truth is, we may never know what happened. And that's the unsettling reality of America's wild places. For all their beauty, they hold secrets. Secrets that sometimes never give up their dead. As we leave behind the mystery of Zhongyuan, a man who vanished without explanation from one of the most iconic and visited national parks in America, we're left with a lingering question. How does someone simply disappear without a trace? And yet, as strange as Zhongyuan's case is, it's far from the only story of its kind. In fact, some of the most unsettling disappearances involve those who seem least likely to wander far: young children. Children tend to leave evidence behind. They leave footprints. They call out when they're lost or frightened. And most of the time when a child goes missing, searchers are able to find them quickly. But that wasn't the case with Samuel Boelke. In our next story, we travel north to Crater Lake National Park in Oregon, where 8-year-old Samuel, an energetic, bright, and playful boy, vanished in broad daylight, while his father watched from only a few yards away. What followed was one of the most exhaustive and frustrating searches ever conducted in the park. And to this day, the disappearance of Samuel Boelke remains one of the most haunting mysteries of the Pacific Northwest. October 14, 2006, was a clear, chilly autumn day. Samuel, who his family affectionately called Sammy, was visiting Crater Lake with his father, Kenneth Boelke. The two had made the trip from their home in Portland, Oregon, to enjoy a weekend getaway. It was the first time Kenneth had taken his son on a trip like this alone. Sammy was a bright, energetic boy. He loved video games, riding his bike, and playing miniature golf. He also had autism, which made the world around him a little different than it was for most kids his age. He was described as high-functioning, but could sometimes become fixated on things or have difficulty with transitions. He wasn't prone to wandering off, though, and his family had always taken great care to ensure his safety. That afternoon around 4 p.m., Kenneth and Sammy stopped at a popular scenic overlook called Cleetwood Cove, a trailhead on the north side of Crater Lake's rim. They parked their car at the pullout, intending to enjoy the view of the deep blue water that fills the ancient volcanic caldera. What happened next has puzzled investigators and haunted Sammy's family ever since. As they got out of the car, Sammy ran ahead of his father toward a gently sloping hill near the overlook. It wasn't a dangerous area. No cliffs, no steep drop-offs. Kenneth followed behind, keeping an eye on his son as Sammy climbed about 50 feet up the hillside. Kenneth later described Sammy as being in a playful mood, scampering up and down, staying within sight. Then, in a moment that seemed to happen in the blink of an eye, Sammy disappeared. Kenneth lost sight of his son for just a few seconds. He had been walking toward Sammy, calling to him, trying to get him to come back down the hill toward the car. But when Kenneth crested the slope where he had last seen his son, Sammy was nowhere to be found. At first, Kenneth thought his son might be hiding. It wouldn't have been unusual for Sammy to play a game like that. But as he began searching in earnest, calling his son's name louder and louder, there was still no sign of him. Kenneth immediately flagged down a passing vehicle and asked them to notify park rangers. Within hours, a full search was underway. Rangers, search and rescue teams, and volunteers combed the area around Cleetwood Cove. They scoured the hillside, dense woods, and rugged terrain. The initial search area covered more than 4 square miles. Helicopters flew overhead with thermal imaging. Teams used tracking dogs, and ground searchers spread out in grid patterns, looking for any sign of the missing boy. At times, more than 200 people were involved in the search. But there was nothing. Not a piece of clothing. Not a footprint. Not even a single clue that indicated where Sammy had gone. It was as if the earth had swallowed him whole. And that's where this case takes a strange turn. The area where Sammy vanished wasn't particularly dangerous. It wasn't close to the rim of the caldera, and there were no cliffs where he could have accidentally fallen. It was open enough that searchers should have easily spotted any movement or evidence of his presence, even after just a few minutes. But he was gone, instantly and completely. Complicating matters, Samuel's autism may have played a role in how he responded to the search efforts. Experts familiar with autism suggested that Sammy might have become frightened by the searchers' calls and noises. If he had gone into a kind of hiding mode, it's possible he deliberately avoided the people looking for him, even if he was cold, hungry, or scared. Park officials also raised the possibility that Sammy may have found a small hiding place, like under a log or in a thicket, and remained there, unseen. But despite thorough searches using dogs trained to detect human scent and helicopters equipped with infrared cameras, nothing was ever found. The weather in Crater Lake National Park can be brutal, especially at elevation. Temperatures at night dropped below freezing in the days after Sammy disappeared. If he had been lost and exposed to the elements, hypothermia would have set in quickly. Search teams continued their efforts for 8 days before scaling back the operation. After that, they moved into a recovery mode, expecting to find remains rather than a living child. But no remains were ever found. Theories about what happened to Samuel Boelke range from the heartbreaking to the bizarre. Some believe he simply got disoriented, wandered farther than anyone realized, and succumbed to the elements in an area searchers missed. Others have speculated about the possibility of an abduction, though no credible evidence ever supported that theory. And then there are those who point to the long history of strange disappearances in America's wilderness. Cases where people seem to vanish into thin air, leaving no trace behind. As of today, Samuel's case remains open with both the National Park Service and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. His family continues to hope for answers, even all these years later. Crater Lake is known for its breathtaking beauty. Its clear, still waters are nearly 2,000 feet deep, making it one of the deepest lakes in the world. But it's also a place of mystery, a landscape carved by ancient volcanic eruptions, where the wilderness still holds secrets. And somewhere in those woods, the mystery of what happened to Sammy Boelke endures. As we wrap up the heartbreaking case of Sammy's disappearance, a bright young boy who seemed to vanish into thin air in broad daylight at Crater Lake, one question still lingers. How does someone disappear so completely, so instantly, without leaving behind a single clue? Sammy was only a few yards away from his father, on a gentle slope without cliffs or dangerous terrain. And despite exhaustive searches and countless theories, nothing has ever been found. His disappearance remains a painful reminder that sometimes the wild places we love can hold secrets we may never uncover. But our next case takes that mystery even further. It's not just a child who disappears in the blink of an eye, but a seasoned national park ranger. Someone who knew the land. Someone who should have been safer than anyone else out there. And yet, what happened to Paul Braxton Fugate in 1980 has puzzled investigators for over 4 decades. It's not just that he vanished. It's the circumstances surrounding his disappearance that led many to believe he was the victim of something far more sinister. Let's head to the Chiricahua National Monument in Arizona, a landscape of towering stone spires and isolated trails. A place where strange things are said to happen, and where, on a quiet Sunday afternoon, Ranger Paul Fugate walked out of the visitor center and was never seen again. On January 13, 1980, Paul arrived for work at Chiricahua National Monument, a breathtaking landscape of towering rock spires, ancient volcanic pinnacles, and rugged canyons. Located in the far southeastern corner of Arizona, near the New Mexico border, Chiricahua is beautiful but remote, a place where civilization feels distant and the wilderness stretches endlessly in every direction. Paul was 41 years old at the time. He was an experienced park ranger, deeply familiar with the monument's terrain and trails. By all accounts, he loved his job and was well liked by his co-workers. That Sunday, he was assigned to work at the park's visitor center, assisting guests and overseeing operations. It was a typical day. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But around 2 p.m., Paul told a colleague he was heading out to check on one of the park's trails. He left the visitor center on foot, wearing his standard National Park Service uniform, green and gray with the distinctive NPS arrowhead patch on his sleeve and his gold-colored ranger badge pinned over his heart. He didn't take any personal items, and he left his car behind. That was the last time anyone saw him. When Paul failed to return to the visitor center later that afternoon, staff initially assumed he was delayed. But as hours passed and daylight faded, concern began to grow. Calls over the park's radio went unanswered. His vehicle remained untouched. By evening, a formal search was underway. Search teams combed the trails and rugged terrain of Chiricahua National Monument for days, then weeks. They covered every known path Paul could have taken and plenty of places off trail as well. Helicopters scanned from above. Ground teams scoured canyons and rock formations, and fellow rangers searched every remote corner they could reach. They found nothing. No footprints, no clothing, no equipment, no signs of a struggle. It was as if Paul Fugate had simply stepped off the trail and disappeared into thin air. But from the beginning, investigators suspected that something darker may have happened. Despite the absence of physical evidence, there were whispers about foul play. Within days of his disappearance, it was clear that this wasn't a case of a ranger getting lost or injured on the trail. Paul knew the terrain too well, and if he'd been in an accident, searchers believed they would have found some trace of him. In the years following his disappearance, rumors swirled. Some suggested that Paul may have stumbled onto illegal activity in the remote park, possibly drug trafficking or poaching operations. In the 1980s, southeastern Arizona was becoming increasingly known as a corridor for drug smuggling and other criminal enterprises. Could Paul have seen something he wasn't supposed to see? Others speculated that his disappearance might have been connected to personal disputes, though there's no public record indicating that Paul was involved in any conflicts that would have made him a target. Despite these theories, no concrete evidence ever surfaced. The Cochise County Sheriff's Office, working alongside the National Park Service, kept the investigation open. Leads came and went, but nothing panned out. During the first few years, the reward for information grew to $20,000. But as time passed, the trail grew cold. Then, decades later, something changed. From early on, there were whispers that this wasn't a simple case of a ranger getting lost in the wilderness. Investigators began to suspect foul play. They believed Paul may have witnessed something he wasn't supposed to see. At the time, the remote areas near the U.S.-Mexico border, especially in southeastern Arizona, were becoming hotspots for illegal drug trafficking and other criminal activities. Some speculated Paul stumbled upon smugglers or poachers operating in the backcountry and was silenced. The problem is, there's no evidence to support this theory, but there's also no evidence to contradict it, and that's what makes this case so chilling. For years, there were rumors that Paul had been murdered and that his body had been buried somewhere deep in the monument or transported far away. Some suggested a cover-up, though it's unclear who would be involved or what motive they might have had beyond keeping criminal activity quiet. Another theory, one that veers into conspiracy, suggests Paul may have been involved in something himself, that he might have willingly disappeared to start a new life or to escape some unknown threat. But by all accounts, Paul was deeply committed to his work, and there was no evidence he planned to leave his life behind. And then there's the possibility that Paul's disappearance ties into something stranger. Anomalous disappearances. The kind you hear about in missing persons cases that seem to defy explanation. Those who lean toward this theory point to other cases in remote parks where people vanish without leaving behind even the smallest trace. For decades, Paul's case went cold. The original reward for information grew to $20,000 in the early years, but no credible leads ever surfaced. It wasn't until nearly 40 years later that something changed. In 2018, the National Park Service and the Cochise County Sheriff's Office announced a renewed investigation. They claimed new information had come to light, details they have never fully disclosed to the public. The reward was increased to $60,000 in hopes of prompting someone to come forward with information that could break the case open. What exactly was uncovered remains a mystery. But this renewed effort suggests investigators believe there are still answers out there. As of today, Paul Braxton Fugate's disappearance remains one of the oldest active missing persons cases in National Park Service history. There's no closure, no body, no confession. Just questions that seem to multiply with time. And for those who wear the uniform of the National Park Service, his story is a chilling reminder. It's not just tourists or hikers who disappear out there. Sometimes, it's the very people sworn to protect the land. Whether Paul Fugate was the victim of a crime, or whether something else entirely happened on that quiet January afternoon, we may never know. But the mystery of his disappearance lingers in the rugged spires of Chiricahua and in the minds of those who still search for answers. For those who work in the National Park Service, Paul's story serves as a sobering reminder. Even the most experienced can vanish. And sometimes, the wilderness keeps its secrets. If you have any information about Paul Braxton Fugit's disappearance, the National Park Service is still actively seeking tips. Maybe one day, his family and the close-knit ranger community will get the answers they've been waiting for.